Welcome to our monthly book club podcast, everyone. This is literally one of my most favorite podcasts ever that we do because I so love connecting with these amazing women and having these incredible discussions that we have about the books. I mean, whether you read the books or don't read the books, I believe the discussions are always enlightening and there's always something to take away from the podcast. Our original book pick for this month was a book that we ended up not reading because it was too complicated to have a book club discussion on. So we did what we call something like living in the flow, which is we pivoted and we picked another book called Understanding the Psychology of Romantic Love. And that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. And I really believe we're going to have a fabulous discussion about that. So quick check-in. Anybody? I know, Noelle, you have big news since last time we saw you.
Right. I'm a grandma. Yay.
Congratulations.
Right. And so she's a month old now. She's a month old on Monday. So she's perfect. Her name's Katara, and she's perfect. And my daughter is a wonderful mom. It's really fun to watch. Really, really fun to watch.
What about you, Darian and Jenna, you two birthday queens?
I don't really have anything. Life is just really, really busy right now.
Well, you had a big birthday, Darian. And what were you doing?
No,
Taxes?
Yeah, I was. I did not have a big birthday. I turned 39 for the second time.
What about you, Jenna? Lots of celebration from your end of things.
Lots of celebration from my end of things, which is not typical for me. I have celebrated birthdays, but usually I keep it pretty casual, like try to keep expectations low. I feel like I've definitely had my fair amount of birthdays when I was younger where expectations were really high and then the actual day was very disappointing. So I really kind of feel like I stopped putting a ton into my birthday because of that. And a couple of things have happened in the last couple of years, including even just seeing Ashlyn really wanting to have her champagne year. And this girl is all about celebration, as people probably know from listening to other podcasts. And I was like, you know what, doggone it, I'm going to celebrate my birthday this year. So I had a great day. I had a birthday party. Ashlyn came out to visit. It was amazing. It was full of surprises. And it was just really special. And it kind of reminded me just celebrating life moments, big and small, because again, like I kind of suppressed, like, it's just my birthday. It was 28. It wasn't like a cool birthday, but we made it one. And it kind of is just, I don't know. I feel like I want to take that as a symbol of life, of like celebrate it. And it's kind of what you make it. So it was great.
We had so much fun celebrating. Jenna had a 90s party.
Well, we should probably jump right in with the book because I actually think we have a ton to discuss about this book. Ashlyn, would you like to read the summary of the book?
I would like nothing more.
Right. Great.
We provides an illuminating explanation of the origins and meaning of romantic love in the human psyche. It explores the myth of Tristan and Isolde through the lens of Jungian psychology, specifically the myth that men unconsciously search for their lost feminine side and then try to live that side of themselves through an idealized version of women. It is a symbolic tapestry picturing vividly the development of an individual male consciousness as he struggles to win his masculinity, to become conscious of his feminine side, and to deal with love and relatedness. This book has the power to change the collective consciousness by creating awareness of what myth has created, and, on a personal level, creates an understanding of romantic love's psychological dynamics so that you can revitalize your most important relationships.
I really think that for the listeners, a brief telling of the myth of Tristan and Isolde is important to give you the context for our discussion tonight. So we don't normally read this much, but I'm going to read a very short version of the myth that this book follows in its entirety to really talk about the masculine and feminine psyche in romantic relationships. This is a story of one man, Tristan, and two women, both named slightly different versions of Isolde. Isolde the Fair and Isolde of the White Hands. This myth begins in the 12th century, which is the time frame that the author theorizes that our collective human consciousness began to spiritualize romantic love. Tristan is a warrior and he falls madly in love with Isolde the Fair, after they both drink a love potion. Tristan puts Iseult the Fair on a pedestal. She is his personal goddess. It is a dangerous love filled with passion and excitement, so much so that they have to hide their relationship from the king. Alas, Tristan is forced to leave Cornwall, where Iseult the Fair resides. With great sorrow, he rides into Brittany and begins fighting for the king of that region. The king has a daughter, Iseult of the White Hands. Tristan loves Iseult of the White Hands for her goodness and her beauty. As a reward for Tristan's bravery, the king gives Iseult of the White Hands to Tristan in marriage. Though Tristan marries and loves Iseult of the White Hands, he rejects her as his wife. Instead of Tristan loving an ordinary woman who he does love and she loves him, he spends his days longing for a woman he can't have and who he idolizes for her perfection, Iseult the Fair. So, Iseult the Fair is the inner ideal of the divine feminine, the goddess that lives within a man's psyche, an image of beauty and perfection that inspires him to try and embody the spiritual meaning of his own feminine energy. He looks outside of himself to Iseult the Fair, the unattainable goddess, in order to find his inner wholeness of his masculine and feminine energies. This is all unconscious to his psyche, and according to the author, the psyches of many of today's men. Iseult of the White Hands is a mortal human who offers him love and relatedness. She is the aspect of the feminine that fits into our ordinary lives and our personal relationships. She is a woman of the earth. Phew, that was a lot. Thanks for hanging in and listening to that, but I really think it'll provide great context. So, all right, everybody. Overall thoughts? Did you like the book? Did you not like the book? Were you familiar with Jungian psychology? And for those listening, Carl Jung was an extremely influential psychologist who theorized about the human unconscious, including the idea that there is a collective consciousness that we are mostly unconscious of.
That was a lot. Say that 5 times fast.
I know, that was probably too much.
I think it was important, like you said, and hopefully if anyone gets confused, they can kind of go back to this and regroup. I did think it went a little long. I could have possibly done without the last conclusion chapters, basically, but I liked the extrapolation from the myth that you just read about in regards to Tristan and Iseult. I did think it also got a little bit wordy at times, but overall, it was a very interesting story, myth, and I would almost call it a thesis. Like, it was very much a thesis on the extrapolation from the myth.
I thought it was good too. I have to say, and this is a completely personal thing, but I didn't love the myth or the mythology because that's not something that I think resonates with me. For me, I think it would have been more powerful if maybe if they had nodes to that, or I liked that they referenced these idealistic super dramas that a lot of us know, even if we weren't familiar with this exact one. He's talking about Romeo and Juliet and a lot of these other things in romance from movies, and how that has collectively shaped our perspective, our Western perspective on romantic love and what that means and what that looks like. For me, just reading through the mythology of it got a little stale. And I was also reading this book on a really advanced timeline because sidebar, I was reading the complete wrong book. I was reading the last one, and then Ashlyn told me that it was this one because I missed some text when I was on vacation, but it was nobody's fault but my own. Anyhow, I digress. But I thought that part got a little wordy, but the analysis and the takeaways were spot on. Seriously, some quotes that I want to write on sticky notes and have them posted. I have a lot highlighted here that I'm excited to dive into, but I think it was kind of like mythology takeaway. Like, it did kind of feel like a thesis, or like you're writing an essay on something. The takeaways were phenomenal, but I almost wanted to read all the takeaways and kind of skip over the mythology, if that makes sense. But that's just a personal preference also.
So then the question is, would the takeaways have been as big, though, if the myth wasn't a part of how it was written?
Right, which is true. And I was kind of trying to think about that too, where it's like, okay, well, for me, I love reading memoirs and biographies and real stories. I like reading fiction too, but I'm more drawn towards real stories. So I think that's why I was drawn to those parts rather than I guess like the fiction. But to your point, if it was a story about two real humans, it takes this foundation of where we form our opinions about these things away. So maybe it was just getting to in the nitty gritty of the story for my personal preference, but I do agree, like that ends up highlighting or giving a pedestal for the takeaways that might not be as impactful without it.
I am actually really glad you mentioned that, because when I was doing my like summary review, I was like, there's one more point I wanted to make and I couldn't remember. And it was just that I also personally like don't necessarily love reading myth. And so it actually took me a while to start this book. And I don't think that outside of this, I would have chosen to do it. But I'm incredibly grateful that I did read this book and that I did read the myth. And I also think another question that ties into this is, did this have the possibility to give us, specific psychological information? And it teaches us like deep truths about our psyche, but did this book do that for you? And I think that this book did, but I would say general myths that like you don't dive into wouldn't do that for me, which is why I'm resistant initially to the idea of reading a myth.
I'll go ahead and just jump in on this. So for me, I actually do love myth. And how it can parallel to reality, right? For me, I was like, this is where courtly love is actually what they called it in the book. What we call romantic love now. I was like, I'm really interested. So of course I kind of went down a little bit of a like research path, and I was really, really interested in the story. One of the things that I did want to mention though is Cleopatra and Mark Antony, because that was even before this time frame. And that's a story that we all know, very similar to Romeo and Juliet, right? One dies, so they take themselves out, then they find out that part and they take themselves out. But for me, I mean, I love the myth aspect of it. I really did. Everything else, you guys know, I talk it in agenda style. I was not about it. So much so that after getting through like the first 2 chapters, I'm like, I'm going to have to find out how to get this thing on audio. And that was not an option. But what I did end up finding, and it made me very, very happy, was on YouTube, somebody was reading the book, but a very condensed, got rid of all the fluffy words. And I was like, oh, I can get to the freaking point, opposed to trying to sift through all the mud of the words, because it makes me nuts. You guys know this. It just, yeah, it was a struggle. And that ended up being 2.5 hours well spent. I probably spent 20 minutes searching, found that video, and I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I will say trying to kind of line it up to the book was a bit of a struggle, but they got to the point, which is what was really helpful for me and what we were actually getting at. Because I, of course, was getting very lost in the myth of it. I wasn't getting out like, man's thought and where we are today. I was not getting that. I was like, I want more of the story.
In the show notes of the podcast, we can actually probably add that YouTube link if anyone's interested in listening to what you just mentioned.
I'll share. I actually agree. I loved the myth, and I agree with everyone here for various reasons, but I love the back and forth between the myth and the philosophy or the psychology behind his version of how he thinks men think in society. And I also love the conclusion chapters. So I did a lot deeper dive in the conclusion chapters, but I thought it was pretty interesting. It was one of the favorites that I've read so far, just because I guess I'm interested in the psychology and the way people think, and the way he explained it through the myth. I thought was beautiful.
I agree with what you just said, Noelle. I too am interested in the psychology. I absolutely love that piece of it. And this book, I really had moments where I was like hitting myself on the forehead with my hand, like, duh, I mean, it's what we kind of all know, but we haven't been able to bring it up to our conscious mind. And once it's there, it's like so obvious, I think, for a lot of the things that he mentioned, especially about the male psyche and even how that relates to the feminine psyche, the female psyche. It's not really, I don't even want to use female. It's really feminine psyche. It's, in my opinion, it's gender neutral because we all have masculine and feminine energy, even if we're in a same sex relationship. We're going to play out these roles somehow, some way in the masculine and the feminine psyche, is my opinion.
This book, regardless of like, if we like myths, if we don't, like if we like the way it was written or don't, I think that the conversation that this book is going to open up, and books that write about similar topics, and the dialogue that we're going to have is so important. And I really appreciate things like this that give us the permission to have that. Because like you said, Paige, I think a lot of the things are like, oh, duh. But when you hear it from someone who clearly has this profound psychological lens and experience and theory to pull from, I always feel like I'm just like, like I'm given the permission. And I feel like this is an important discussion to have around love. And I know we're going to get more into the nitty gritty, but I really think it's an important discussion to have around the expectations of females in relationships too, and how we really, in all relationships, by societal standards, are just expected to be perfect in every way. And it's like, you have to be this, but you have to be kind, but not too kind that you're a pushover. And you have to be powerful, but not too powerful to where you're a B. And, you have to command a room, but don't take over men. And it's like, it just is this, it's exhausting sometimes. And I think every woman can feel that to a certain degree. And so pieces of art and writing that open up this conversation are really important to me. And I'm honestly grateful and happy that we get to have this conversation.
Me too.
Yeah, I think we should go to the question about that. What do you think, Mom?
Go ahead and read it, Shalini.
So I think that's a perfect lead in, Jenna, and I completely reiterate your sentiment. So on page 94, it says, we demand of women that they act out that role and be goddesses rather than human beings. By trying to make women divine, we lose sight of their humanity and rob them of their womanhood. And then again, on page 109, it says, our culture trains women that their role is not to be human beings, but to be mirrors who reflect back to a man his ideal or his fantasy. She must struggle to resemble the current Hollywood starlets. She must dress and groom herself and behave in such a way as to make herself into the collective image of the feminine express of a man's soul. She must not be an individual so much as the incarnation of men's fantasy. So, as a woman, what do you guys think of this? Have you found yourself unconsciously acting this out? This goddess version of yourself? These pressures? Do you see it in the women around you? Like, I could think of so many women when I was reading this book that fit into this. And of course, times in which I myself do.
So I think that this is very spot on. I can think about my younger self and how I really tried to fit into that. And it wasn't until my 40s that I was like, that's not even who I am. And why do I feel like I have to play this role? And I think it's something that is layered. I think it started off as a fantasy of men, this goddess image. I mean, long, long ago. And then somebody came up with an idea how women could fit that. And then the bar was raised. Oh, but I also want this. And I think that's where we see even the cosmetic surgery industry, the makeup, the all of that industry stems from that. So I think he was spot on. And I can see how I played into that so much when I was younger. And I based my worth on whether or not somebody thought I was attractive. So I definitely see that.
And I think it stems from a lot of different things, right? Like you said, the cosmetic industry, a lot of industries were able to tap onto that. But I think a big point he's making here is that that stems from long ago when we got fixated on this idea of romantic love as the only type of like non-platonic love instead of, I think he calls it human love, right? And I think we don't idolize that. And romantic love is this like passionate, fiery, all of these things, honestly chaotic and dramatic too. But then you yourself have to fit this mold to go into that. And I absolutely feel that. Like, I think we all have some of those pressures in our life, but I'm like I'm in a long-term relationship now. But before that, I remember like when I wanted all of these things, like wanted a marriage, wanted these things, I really felt like not so much that I had to fit into an exact box, but I guess I did, where it's like the pieces of you that didn't fit into that box or the expectation, I wouldn't show those layers, and I'd be really guarded about those layers that maybe didn't show like the feminine side, or even if it was like there are certain masculine energies that are more acceptable, right? Like being athletic, for example. Like I would showcase what was acceptable from both the feminine and masculine, but like everything else where it's like, ooh, is this going to be seen as this or that? Really kind of shut that off. So I think that is really, it's an interesting and relatable point that I think every woman can relate to, I think, to some capacity.
Something that I kind of want to say is at the end of that, they talk about, he says actually, but there's a heavy price attached to this role.
Yes, there is.
My question is what do you see as that price? What is the price that you have each paid for that role? I'm curious.
I think Noelle nailed it when she said her worth was tied to that. And I think it's that way for all of us. I never fit the goddess archetype. And Ashlyn can probably attest to this. Iseult of the White Hands is who I am at the essence of myself. I have never been the woman who needed to have the bag, the shoes, the makeup, any of that. That's just never been who I am. But I was married to someone who very much fits this masculine psyche of wanting his woman to be Iseult the Fair, the goddess. So I never felt like I was enough. I could never live up to it. I could never be worthy of who he wanted me to be. And it took a huge toll for many years of my life on how I felt about myself, how I believed about myself. At one point in our relationship, and I remember this like it was yesterday, so I laughed out loud when I was starting to read some of these unconscious beliefs of the masculine in relationship to Iseult the Fair, the goddess. I remember we lived in Larkspur at the time. I can remember the house. I can remember the location. And he was going off about something. And I looked at him and I said, "You do realize that I am a human being." And I thought, when I read this, I was like, well, I just couldn't be that person that he wanted me to be.
The interesting thing on the flip side of that, as your daughter, growing up with that male psyche, but not just from my dad, I mean, from like the greater masculine energy within my family. So uncles, grandpa, like it's a collective held belief because they all picked it up in this cultural myth that we've created. And I always felt so supportive and encouraged by my dad. I literally always knew I could be and do whatever I wanted. But the interesting thing was, for me, I had a little bit more of that imprinting from my uncles and even my grandpa a little bit. And again, these are all men like I absolutely love and adore, and they don't even realize sometimes they're doing it. But I actually kind of stayed out of the dating game for a hot minute because I felt like I couldn't be that Iseult the Fair. Like I just didn't know that I could ever live up to what I was supposed to be as a woman. And so that kept me sidelined for a long time because I was like, I'm too much this or I'm too much that, or I blah, 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 all the fake news that would take me from being that perfect goddess on the hill, but just weighs 10 pounds and doesn't open her mouth too often. And, like, sounds silly, like, not that anyone ever put this on me, but there's even this, perception, like, sometimes, like, women joke, like, they don't poop. Like, not to get, like, weird, but I'm just saying, like, there's literally this level out there of, like, we are so unhuman, we don't even have to go to the bathroom. So I just think that's a really interesting, layer to kind of consider.
The other thing that really fascinated me about this when I looked at this male archetype, specifically through the lens of Ashlyn's dad and his side of the family. And this is nothing bad or against them. This is just the psychology that they were raised in, and it is the myth that they accepted as their own. But they were from a very masculine focused household, which I found very interesting. Like, there wasn't really room for the divine feminine in that household at all. It was 3 boys.
They sought the feminine so much because they didn't have that as much. And one thing I really do want to add in here, just because we are talking about family, but I think it's also an important perspective, because I think as a society we can start to talk about concepts like this, and can kind of build this like man-hating energy of like, well, screw them, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, these are good men. These are really good people. These are people that would lay their life on the line for me, that have supported me, they have loved me, they have cheered me on. They just had no idea they
didn't know what was in their unconscious mind.
Yeah, and they didn't do it to me necessarily, although they started to as they got older, to put these perceptions. But even the people that they're married to, they don't realize that they have this standard within that. And so I just think that's important as we have this conversation. Like, these things, we all have our inherent unconscious, subconscious biases. It doesn't make us good or bad people. It just kind of is. So like, we have to kind of take the conversation around this as well from that lens.
And I think one of the reasons that I was just so much this like Iseult of the White Hands, this earth woman, was because I was raised in a home with a lot of divine feminine energy, not the goddess energy, but like that pure human divine feminine energy. My dad he was a masculine man, but I don't believe that he actually carried this myth in his collective.
I think it ties back to seeking the energy that either maybe you lack in your romantic relationships. And the author goes at it from more of a masculine and feminine standpoint. But I personally think, in my experience, it is kind of a fulfillment of these insecurities, regardless of the masculine and feminine energy. I think that is kind of what this chaotic romantic fulfillment does at that surface level. I think a lot of times that's where like the drama and chaos comes, because it's like you're chasing this person because you're trying, from a female perspective, you're chasing this person because you want validation or you want fulfillment out of it. But really, it's like, in what ways are you chasing, I guess, the things you lack or some insecurities you have that you think are validated by somebody else? And going back to the book, it's like the reason we do that is because pure love, or the human love, can be quote unquote boring sometimes, because at its essence, things are complicated, life is complicated, but that human love is more simple than the chaos of romantic lust and love that we are talking about. And Darian's question earlier, when she was talking about how has that kind of impacted each one of us, and a lot of people were talking about their self-worth, I think I noticed more than anything, for me, it was chaos and drama. Like, when I would be in romantic relationships with people who weren't a fit, and I was trying to constantly either fit into a mold or be something for the other person, or kind of chase a person who I know wasn't emotionally available, it wasn't stable. It was always chaotic. It was always a game, a chase, like crazy, like amygdala response to love. Whereas now I feel like if I were to describe love in a more long-term relationship, which I know I don't have nearly as much experience as a lot of ladies on this podcast, and a lot of ladies who I'm sure are listening, ladies and men, and individuals, but I think it's like, there is drama. Life has drama in it, but there's a steady state where it's just like this constant pulse of like, yeah, you are just folding your laundry and living life with another partner. You are just like eating lunch together sometimes. It's not this like, oh my gosh, and then this and all of that. So I think we don't, of course, idolize that or like dramatize that, but like the simplicity and in that kind of love is really.
I think another layer of this that we need to consider is also beyond the physicality of what you should be. I wanted to read this quote around the daily life type stuff because it actually ties into season 2, episode 13, the masculine and the feminine. And she made a comment about men at some point going, where did the woman I married go? And she sees this. She's a sex and relationship coach, and she sees this. And this quote I felt like was really good. And she ties it into the fact that how are you supposed to be in your femininity, in that feminine energy when you have 1,000 things going on, and the task-oriented side of our energies is more masculine. So where did that feminine energy go? Well, she's overwhelmed with life. If you want her back a little bit, have somebody help her with the laundry and putting the kids to bed and all those kinds of things so she can take a minute to breathe and settle into that flow energy. So on page 79, it said, the courtly belief that true love can only exist outside marriage is still with us today, unconsciously affecting us more than we know. A man expects his wife to take care of the children, have food on the table, contribute to the family income, and back him up in the daily struggles of human life. Obviously, caveat to that, this is not in the written part, but not every man believes that. Again, we're just kind of speaking within this book lens. But some other part of him wants her to be the incarnation of Anima, the holy lady in the sky who is always beautiful and perfect. He wonders how the pure and shining goddess whom he adored turned into this ordinary wife who seems utterly unreasonable. A woman sees her husband working, paying the bills, getting the car repaired, and defending his empires, living the ordinariness of life. She wonders what happened to the knight who adored her and worshipped her when he was courting her in the days when everything was so intense, so ecstatic, so blissful. The old unconscious belief returns to haunt them, whispering that true love is somewhere that it can't be found within the ordinariness of marriage. And I just think that also sums up this conversation so well. It's like, how are you to be both, right? And it goes to this masculine and feminine that are in each and every one of us. We have to have the space to be that goddess in the moments that we know that we can, because we do all have a bit of that goddess in us. We all have that beautiful, divine, feminine essence, but we also have humanness. And so how can we honor both of those? And just realizing that in ordinary life, there might be a moment for one side and there might be a moment for another.
Well, to me, this is all about expectation, and expectations that we not only put on ourselves, but then the expectations of others that we're trying to fulfill of our romantic partners. And those, we can be buried alive by those expectations. You're all nodding.
Another thing that I was thinking about as we were sharing is that we also project onto our partners this idea that they expect us to be that, because we get it everywhere. I mean, we see it in movies and TV and online, and you just see it everywhere, and you don't see the humanness a lot of the times. So we're assuming with that projection that that's what they want. Mm-hmm. So we have to be careful too that we're not playing into that belief system as well.
I have never related to something so much, actually, because I had been struggling with this recently. So my boyfriend and I live together, and he is like the way he shows love is acts of service. So he does a lot of stuff around the house, and I would be lying if I said it was 50-50. It is absolutely not. He does way more than I do. I show my love in different ways, but I really felt like I was slacking, and that was not coming from a reaction from him. It was not like nobody said that. It literally came from these expectations. Like, we weren't arguing about it. He didn't care. He was happy to do it, but I was like, well, now I need to cook dinner this many days next week, because like that's the role that I'm supposed to fulfill, even though I don't really like cooking. Or like, even though I don't want to do this, or like I need to empty the dishwasher this many times to show this. And it was so interesting because I'm like, where am I getting this from? And it was like, it is truly subconscious from the programming. And we even had a discussion about it. And he's like, I'm happy to do this stuff. Like, I will let you know if I feel like this particular area of life you're slacking in, but he's like, I don't feel like you are. You support me emotionally and in all these other ways that I maybe can't support you the exact same way. And so that, I think that is such an important thing to say. It's like, where are these expectations created when maybe an individual isn't putting them on you, but you're putting them on yourself because of what we've been subconsciously trained to think and believe.
Yeah. Darian, you've been awfully quiet. Do you want to weigh in on any of this?
I was actually sitting here as Jenna was talking, and I have a very similar situation in my house. The last year or so, you guys know, I've had a lot of change, a lot of change. And what's been interesting is I've always been the cook in the house. I'm still not entirely sure how my husband has made it 53 years after he attempted to cook me dinner one time. Still not sure on that. But, I always made dinner. I always took care of the animals. I always paid the bills. I always cleaned the house because I had my ways of doing it. And over this last year, with all of these changes, it's also forced that change on me. So, the roles in this have all kind of reversed. Now he's taken over paying the bills. He does way more house cleaning. And I do feel bad, but sometimes I'm like, meh, it's your turn, buddy. I've been doing it for years. But when it comes to, the masculine and the feminine and being a goddess, I will tell you right now, I don't feel like a goddess at all. I think of, I see pictures of when we first started dating and things like that. And I've always kind of had, I always, march to the beat of my own drum, right? I always do my own thing. And right now, I'm okay with the role change. I really am. It's interesting to see how he has handled it. He hasn't handled it nearly as well. Me, I'm just kind of, meh.
Where you were going with this, were you kind of alluding to the fact that you don't physically feel like a goddess at this time?
Yeah, at this time, not right now. And I think it's just mostly because I'm super drained as a human. I just don't have not only the bandwidth to put into people. I spend more time putting all of my energy into people than I do myself. And in catching that and hearing myself say that out loud, I'm a little surprised at myself. And I'm going, yeah, no, I need to reel that back in. It's time to slow it down and put it back on me. And so I can do that. So I can have that feeling again, because having that goddess feeling isn't wrong.
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting too, kind of even when you were like, oh, when I look at pictures, it's like, but your goddess is not tied in to exactly that, right? The goddess energy is more than physical appearance or, other aspects of that. But I do hear what you're saying in regards to the energy needing to be replenished. But I would just invite you to consider how, as you mentioned, in showing up for these other people, are you showing up in your goddess energy? That nurturing, loving, supportive, caring energy, that is freaking goddess energy right there. That is badass. That is the embodiment of the feminine as well. So on camera moment of truly an example of how we feel, right? If we're not looking our best or feeling $1 million or feeling like a supermodel, as in just slaying it in certain ways, we sometimes take away from ourselves the amazing things that we are doing and we are contributing in that feminine expression. So, just putting that out there for you.
Well, if we're all ready, let's move on to the next question. We've talked about how we as females feel. So what beliefs identified from the male collective consciousness did you find interesting or enlightening? And did any of you talk to your romantic partners or male friends about the ideas in this book about the male psyche?
I can answer that really quick. That was a solid no.
You did not talk to Brent?
No, because I got stuck down that whole myth. And then I wanted to know, is there actually real people? And then it was the timeline of it. And we went down a whole different rabbit hole. So that's a solid no.
I read to Mike just the synopsis of the book, and it was crickets. So there you go.
I'm fairly certain that's the response I would have gotten too. But who knows? I haven't broached that subject yet. But for me, it's really interesting. We've talked a lot about the expectations of us as females, but I actually think I have in some ways adapted from things that have happened to me, and rejection and hurt. I've adapted to this male energy. And from growing up, I would say I had kind of a 50-50 split. I would say my mom is super feminine and my dad is super masculine. Of course, there's nuances to that, but like in the way that it's described in the book, I think my dad takes on these archetypes that are in this book. Like, don't need to go into more detail, but it's pretty spot on for the most part. So I don't think for me, I felt like growing up, I had a good balance of all of those things. But I think from some of the conditioning, I think I've taken on some of that masculine energy. And so where I'm going with this and where I'm going to tie it into answering the question is, it actually gave me a little bit, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm a feminist, tried and true, but it gave me a little bit of empathy for the masculine side of things, because I think we always look at it like, oh, men, like they just want everything, they want this and that. And it's like, I have experienced this side of the masculine energy where it really becomes like a defense mechanism, where it's like, no, I'm going to be the one who has these really high expectations, who gives no grace for anything, who expects my partner to be perfect, and expects that for a couple reasons, because it's easier if I'm the runner. And so it's really, I've seen how that energy is really a developmental coping mechanism. I feel compassion for how all of that really is just a culmination of building up these walls. And if you're the person rejecting, or you're the person who has these impossible expectations that can't be met, you're subconsciously kind of setting yourself up for failure intentionally. And it sounds crazy, right? Because it's like, well, no one would do that intentionally. Like, who wants that? But it's like, because you don't want to get hurt. So if you're the one that's like looking for flaws in the other person, you take on that masculine kind of rejector role. And really, it truly comes from a place of deep hurt and wounds. Like, I can think of specific reasons that led to this in my life. Like, when I was growing up, there were probably 3 or 4 guys that I like just spilled my feelings to. Flat out rejected, not interested, didn't want to be with me, like did not choose me. And then you kind of turn the opposite way. So I think, yeah, a lot of this comes from the books we read and all of these things, but it also comes from the experiences we have. And so that gave me empathy for that, because sometimes I think, yeah, men have it all. What more? Like, they don't need our empathy, but I have experienced that from that point of view. And I know that sometimes there's a lot of hurt that comes with that, and building up those walls and creating that masculine energy.
This is actually blowing my mind, because going to college with Jenna, the boys loved Jenna. Like, Jenna would have a line of men and she'd be like, I'm not interested, because she'd be in that masculine. Like, she was low-key savage, but in the best way, like in a way that I admired, where I was like, wow, like she has so many guys that like her and she's so empowered. Like, she's not like, oh, I hope he likes me kind of vibe. But as we've unpacked recently, Jenna and I had kind of a conversation about this, and it ties into what she said. There was a level of self-protection, which, again, as an outside perspective, I didn't see that in her as a level of self-protection. I saw that in her as like a badass empowerment. And I think that that's something we have to keep in mind with men, right? Maybe it is just a self-protection in some of these things. And we know this. The reason that the masculine has gotten out of balance at times is because they're wounded. It's the wounded masculine. Just like we have a wounded feminine, we have a wounded masculine. The true man doesn't want to be, hurting people.
Well, and that wounded masculine is what he is talking about in this book, which is they have lost touch with their feminine side, which means that what they know and how they act is that forceful power. And we know that when power is not balanced with love, things get really out of whack. And that love is that divine feminine piece within them if that they weren't raised with that, has really created that wounding. You know, they're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to have feelings. They're not, you know, they have to be strong and the provider, and they have to be the warrior. You know, Tristan in this myth was the warrior. And what does the warrior have to be? Savage. If it is not balanced with nurturing and love and softness, it gets way, way, way out of whack. And it's a very lonely life to live, I think, inside when you don't have that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm a huge softie at heart. Like, cry at movies, cried at everyone's birthday cards they wrote me. Like, I feel safe to live that out. Not always, not in every single aspect of my life, because we know it's not fully societally accepted. But like Paige says, I can attest, it feels so much better to live in that than to live in like protection, nobody's good enough, I can't show any emotion, all of these things mode.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Noelle?
I was also going to say, and I wonder if that shows back up. I don't remember reading anything about this, but there was a lot of meat in this book. But, you know, I wonder if there comes a point where the wounded masculine is resigned. Mm-hmm. And then the wounded masculine goes through midlife crisis. And that's
I actually think that was written about in the book. Mm-hmm.
I also think we see it in our modern day society. I think many, many, many of the men in their 50s, 40s, 50s truly are going through a midlife crisis because they haven't tapped into that feminine side, and because society has told them that they couldn't. I also feel like this ties into answering your question for me. Did I send this to any man? One, I think you'd have to have a very like secure relationship to have that conversation. But two, I think they need to read it themselves because it's pretty vulnerable. So if you're asking them to shift into that state of self-reflection, that state of vulnerability, that state of like kind of letting your guard down to expose some things, you got to give them the space to be vulnerable. And so am I going to recommend this book to a couple men? 100%. But I'm probably not going to talk to them about the contents as much as let them do their own self-exploration within that, because that's very vulnerable within this process.
I wanted to mention something that I thought was so empowering from the podcast we did with Mary Kubek on the masculine and feminine. And Mary admittedly said, I'm a very masculine woman. You know, I'm a police officer. My energy is very masculine. And she said, I wanted to learn to be more feminine. And I was working with this person and I asked them, you know, what can I do to balance my masculine and my feminine? And this person looked at her and said, Mary, it's not about balance. It's about bringing your feminine up to meet your masculine. And I just thought that was so profound because that's what you want. You want the most vivid, big expression, the fullness of both of these energies, the masculine and the feminine in your own life. You want to be that powerhouse, but you also want to be that powerhouse that operates within this beautiful expression of love. That power and love are always right there in balance with each other.
And it gives you this permission that you don't have to fit in the box, right? It's not like, oh, if you're masculine, now you have to become Isolde of the Fair. You don't have to do that. Like you don't have to ying that far, but you can bring her up within you to balance and to match your other side of things, which I think gives us a little bit of freedom to be ourselves in this masculine and feminine balance, and not in society's opinion of the masculine and feminine balance. Because she also says you actually don't typically find balance. True. Like, you're not typically 50-50 with your partner or within yourself. So let's throw that societal expectation out the door too.
100%. So where someone is masculine, the other takes on the feminine, and the opposite. And then I also talked about you have a healthy relationship, you're sharing both those roles and they're fluid instead of being completely in your masculine or completely in your feminine all the time. They move and they flow.
Totally.
Well said. All right, let's get on to our very last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. So on page 43, it says a relationship may not be based on romance. I use that in quotes at all. It may be based simply on love, which is completely different than romance, romantic love. On page 44, it also says we are all so caught up in the belief that romantic love is true love that we use the term for many things that are not romantic love at all. We assume that if it is love, it must be romance. And if it is romance, it must be love. So after reading this book, what do you think of those statements? Do you believe that our culture has served up a whole set of truths about romance that we have unconsciously accepted? Darian?
I was going to say, I think Ashlyn said it earlier, fake news.
I think we turn back to what we know is true. Put away all of the things that we've heard about love and think about a romantic relationship that you deeply admire and respect. I have a couple, I have a handful. I don't know any of them that are like, yeah, it's just everything's so romantic all the time. We just come running into each other's embrace every night. My parents have been married for 35 years. I deeply respect their relationship. That is not what their relationship looks like. It's not what my grandparents' relationship looks like. It's not what anyone's relationship that I admire looks like. I think that, again, I'm not that far. I'm not even 35 years old yet, let alone have a 35-year marriage. But I think there is this reality that you have to turn back to of knowing the people's relationships that you really admire, seeing the struggles that they've gone through. But for me, there's this with my parents, I've seen they have this just deep respect and commitment to each other, where even when they want to rip each other's heads off, they are fully committed to the promise they make. And granted, I know that there's a lot of asterisks to that. I know a lot of people are in unhealthy marriages that they committed to, and that commitment should not be kept. But I loved what he said about it really all boils down to loyalty and commitment, because those feelings will inevitably come, go, fade. I also think, and I hope they're okay with me talking about it, I think about Martin's parents who aren't in an arranged marriage, but it's not like what we would consider as like Western culture. Like it was very much kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. Not fully arranged, but not fully like they got to like choose their person kind of. And they have such an incredible relationship that is based on that commitment and love and shared experiences and growing together, that it's just given me a whole new perspective on all of this. Again, fake news. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to read about. It's fun to experience those feelings in the beginning or whatever. It's fun to read books about, but that's not the way I've ever seen anything play out in real life.
I keep thinking of the word foundation. So I have seen a lot of people get caught up in the romance and believing that due to societal standards, for example, romantic movies, possibly Nicholas Sparks, like, things like that, that they believe that's what romance is supposed to be. And so you can find romance. I myself, I've found a little bit of romance, but I'm going to tell you what, there was not actual love there. And so the thing is I believe that this true love or this human love or whatever they were calling it in the book is actually like what you can build a foundation and what you can build a life on. And so, yeah, romance is beautiful and great. And if you can build that love and have romance, I mean, jackpot, right? If you can truly love each other, support each other, see each other, honor the humanness, honor the divine masculine, the divine feminine, all these things in each other as you build this life through conscious decisions, through choice, through commitment. And then also buy flowers and dance at a wedding and, run home and want to make out. Amazing. But I think we have to give ourselves grace in that as well. I think the romance will be there sometimes in some stages of life and not in others. And that even ties into the previous commentary about like, where did my wife go? Or, I expect her to bathe the children, make dinner and all that, well, maybe that might be a stage where a little bit of romance might be missing. But then you could have it a little more at another time. So I think that I would hope and encourage that so many people start to look at love more from that idea of building the foundation. And you can't just get caught in the feeling. You have to make a logical decision within that. But again, I think it's a merging of the feeling with the logical piece. And it's something that I'm exploring currently in a relationship. I'm like, okay, this foundation feels good. Could we have a little more romance? Like this kind of thing. So yeah.
I think that's the big takeaway from this book, though, really, is to, as you evaluate your relationships, and especially if you're just entering into a new relationship, really have this awareness of romance is awesome and it is fun and it is passionate and it feels good. But really look at this bigger idea of love. And don't get confused between romantic love and love in this really universal, earth-centered, and even divine-centered, like it's kind of a combination of the two perspective.
Here contemplating romantic love, and you know, I know you, for example, you're kind of a hopeless romantic. You are. And how has this book, has that changed it for you?
I think that's a really good question. And I'd also love to hear what Jenna says on this, because it has been something that I've been contemplating. I read this book primarily today, and I actually kind of need to sleep on some of this because it has shaken me up a little bit. I still do believe that great love exists, but it has actually changed my lens a little bit. I've always had that balance in me of recognizing that you can't just get swept up in the feeling. You have to have the logical side, but it's helping me reevaluate even some of my perceptions on like the feeling and what that great love should look like. So it's honestly, Darian, that was a very emotionally intelligent, insightful question, because it is something that I have been noodling on today. And I don't exactly know how to fully answer that, but Jenna, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Oh man. I don't think the book changed my perspective. I think living out my life has changed my perspective. And the book validates some of those things that you think. Again, I've taken on this masculine energy where I've looked for flaws in partners just so that things wouldn't work out, like self-sabotage to not get hurt. Or because it didn't look like this perfect, romance is there in every second way, that was a bad thing. But then I think I don't know, I've gotten to this point where I'm with a person that I really love, and I know that love goes way beyond, for me, palpable, romantic, lustful feelings that I know come and go, if that makes sense. And for me, when that's come and gone in the past, I'm like, this is boring. This sucks. Oh, we don't have anything in common. Oh, you're not actually funny. Oh, we can't have fun together. Where it's like, for me, I'm with a person where it's like there's a deep friendship at the core of it. And I do find that there's like this sentimental love that you would almost have, that universal divine love that Paige was speaking about. And then that gets overlapped with a choice, which that has been a learning experience through me with my life, where I don't think a lot of these myths and things we talk about ever talk about choice and love. It's like this thing that just overtakes you, and you're just fallen, and you're almost not a victim to love, but you're like, there's no choice in it. And that just, I don't know. I don't think that that's true in long-term relationships. But I think living out my life has changed me. I think this is an important thing to read when you're considering getting into like a serious relationship. And like, I'm sure people who are already married and have way more experience would really benefit from this as that like gentle reminder too.
I did want to tag off of what Jenna just said, because I think you're so right that like the life piece also plays into it. These last 2 months, we have been transforming limitations in romantic relationships. That has been our intention. That has been the energy and the space that we have tried to hold for ourselves and every single person that's on this Love Ignites Peace lifestyle journey with us.
I want to tag on to that. We've been transforming the limitations in these romantic relationships to love that is the universal love, not the fake news kind of love.
Exactly. And I think that your question probably is answered by these last 2 months. Like, even starting from A Love Letter Life, right? When we read the book we read last month, like, this beautiful relationship that is all over the TV and all over social media. And then you read about it and you read, like, this was actually cultivated. This is a choice, the word that Jenna was using. Like, this is a commitment. This is a shared foundation that we've grown our love in. Like, it has totally changed my perspective in a lot of ways. It has given me a lot of compassion for people and also a lot of new ways to support people in their relationships. And I just cannot recommend enough for anyone listening to go back and listen to the podcasts we've done over the last 2 months, especially the last 3 before this podcast, which you can see when you tap right out. And then on the flip side, like, I have my own experience that's happening in life currently that's awakening me. And I have so much gratitude for the people I've dated in the past. I have the gamut of someone that I did really, really care about, but just truly wasn't the right fit foundationally. Like, I would have spent my whole life trying to keep him afloat and not drowning, but I loved him. So it's like, okay, but is that enough? Is that true love? And then you have the romance where you have this, like, hot and heavy chemistry and just this, like, whirlwind romance, but, like, I don't really feel like we're not a good match. Like, there's not a lot of depth there. So you have all these experiences, and now I've met someone that I have, like, incredible depth with, and building that foundation. But now, can I let, like, the love and the romance grow within that? Or is that the first standard? It has to be, like, hot and heavy, or it doesn't matter. So it's like this whole exploration. And I guess my point in sharing this is just to encourage anyone that's on their journey to realize that life and this experience of exploring our masculine, our feminine, our love, our romantic love is a journey. And to, as he says, let these moments be lessons that you learn from and transform from, versus cycles that you have to repeat over and over and over until you finally get it. And I also want to throw out there, just for those listening, that he has an additional book called She. And it is She, Understanding Feminine Psychology. Now, with the caveat, I have not read it yet. Noelle, did you read it?
I did not read it, but he also has a he. He has a he and a she.
Yeah, so I'd highly recommend possibly checking those out. Again, recommend as in this one went well, so I feel like there's more discovery in the two, but I haven't read it. So I guess I can't give my personal recommendation, but yeah, a she and a he. So those could be other great ways for us to understand ourselves and each other.
I feel like, okay, I want the juicy scoop. No, I'm kidding, not the juicy scoop. But I feel like, Darian, I know you're married. Noelle, I think you said you're married as well. I don't know. I feel like I want your guys, Darian, you said fake news, but I feel like I truly cherish the perspective from people who have been married and, like, been through it, right? So I don't know. That was open-ended, but, like, I don't know. I would love for you to expand a little bit more, or, like, even, like, I don't know, advice you have.
It's never ending for me, like, exploring how to show up as myself while allowing someone else their own individuality. And I can tell you, I think that's the most important piece about relationship, is you are two unique individuals. You're not coming together to make a whole. You're two unique individuals that don't need someone else to fill in, but you enjoy each other's company, and you find joy together. And even in the times you're not in joy, just remember that will come. So make it your goal to follow the energy of what brings you happiness, and that will benefit both of you in relationship.
This is the good stuff. Don't edit this out of the podcast.
I think that was such a good question to ask. But Paigey Poo just lost internet coming in live during the book club podcast. So she just texted me that her final vote is 4.5, which brings us to a 3.7 average rating for this month's book club podcast, or book club. The podcast, we're, I would say, each giving a 5. I mean, we're biased, but I feel like we're each giving the book club podcast a 5. But the actual book, we're giving a 3.7. And so this is wrapping up our series on transforming limitations in romantic relationships to love. And so the next 2 months, we are going to be dedicated to transforming the limitations in your spiritual life to even more self-love. So buckle up, get excited in October and November. For October, we'll be reading one of Jenna's very favorite books called The Universe Has Your Back by Gabby Bernstein. And if you want to get a jump start on November, we will be reading Heaven is Beautiful by Peter Pangor. And we actually will also be having Peter on for one of our podcasts. So kind of a double dip or double whammy on that one. But we are so grateful for everyone that tuned in today, and we'd love to hear your comments. So please throw us a comment, write us a message, write us a review, subscribe to the podcast, all the things. We're so grateful you're here. And as always, we hope that you get your freak on.